what he'll be talking about, but I'll let him introduce his topic. And yeah, I'll just pass the floor to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Evan. It's great to be here. Thanks, everyone, for having me. So change. We're going to talk about organisational change, particularly as it affects people. And I know all of you are really interested in that. So I'm trying to make it as relevant as possible. So the opportunities in transformation and change are huge, right? You know, look at all these great benefits in this very satisfied gentleman here. You know, I love that guy. Look how pumped he is about change. And, you know, with change, you can improve your competitive position if you're in the private sector, or you can improve how you impact your stakeholders in the public sector. Return on capital, automation, efficiency, tools to support employees. We are actually helping employees with all these changes, right? And performance is going to increase. We're going to take away bureaucracy, get you doing the things you really love doing, take away all those sort of boring menial tasks and manual work. And, you know, those new competitors in the market, we don't have to worry about them because change is going to mean we keep up with them and do an even better job and beat them in the market, and fewer customer errors. And we're going to be so fantastic as a result of all these changes, right? And change is just the norm now. It's going faster and faster. We've just got to change more and more and faster, don't we? Right? Yes. Just like this guy here. And then inevitably there's these conversations that kind of go sort of like this. And I often ask these kinds of questions when I work with organizations. So what is our track record with change, successful change? We scratch our heads and sort of think about it and go, well, there's a couple last year didn't go that well. The others, don't really know. We didn't even ask anyone or track any success with them. So not really sure there. Have we ever implemented this much change? Well, like we just said, you know, change is going faster and more intense than ever and bigger, and it's more frequent. And, you know, it's so much uncertainty out there. So not really. I think it's just going to be more and more, right? Are we going to do things differently this time? Well, do we need to? Don't really know. What would we do? Are we ready to do this? Not really sure about that one. Will we invest in managing the changes differently? What does that even mean? But the answer is, you know, not sure, but we've just got to make this happen, right? We've even already committed to the board and told everyone we're doing all this stuff and all these benefits are going to flow in the next 2 to 3 years. So, you know, just keep your eyes on those juicy benefits and the outcomes, and it's all going to be fine. Let's just keep going with it. Fast forward, and you often have these kinds of things in organisations where we haven't thought about the people impact of changes across the organisation. Can lead to things like unreasonable workloads for people, increases in employee turnover. When we're doing change badly, this is stress, disruption to other work, your business as usual work, you're trying to get your job done and then something happens in the month and suddenly you've got to attend some training and some new system you've got to adopt and figure it out, and it's completely different to your old spreadsheets and your past ways of doing things, and you've got to get your head around it, and it's hugely disruptive. And that can actually lead to a dip in our productivity, particularly as we're going through major cycles of change. Job satisfaction, we can go home feeling like this, right, where we're frustrated, where we felt we had to rework things, or we didn't get it, or we felt, you know, our leaders aren't caring enough about us, or our leaders are making bad decisions for the organisation. Suddenly we feel a bit disillusioned with where the organisation is going, potentially, if we're not being brought on the journey. So decreases in trust and leadership, performance, all these challenges can occur if we don't manage change effectively. So suddenly all those juicy benefits start turning into real challenges for an organisation, which can lead to loss of value and significant damage for employees as well. So a case, I mean, I was in a working group meeting for a new project, working with a government organisation actually. It's a human capital management system, associated changes that come with that. And after the meeting, I walked out and a nice gentleman came up to me and he said, "Oh, Huw, if there's anything you need, I want me to be a subject matter expert. Happy to help you with this project. It sounds great." And I said, "Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks so much. Well, what's your role?" And he said, "Oh, I used to be a HR business partner." I'm like, "All right. What do you do now?" And he sort of looked at me blankly and said, "I'm not even sure what my role is." What are you talking about? It's 3 months before the organisation went through a reorganisation, announced major changes, but they didn't think through the detail, the impacts, and what actually even the detailed level of people's roles are. Another training manager in that same floor said to me on that Monday, a week earlier, she had 3 new employees rock up to her office saying, "Oh, now we're reporting to you," apparently. She didn't even know that. Changes can get a bit weird, right, if they don't think through the details about these things. So change is a process and an outcome, and it needs to be led. So I love this little cartoon. Who wants to change? Yeah, we all want to change, right? We want to see change. We want to experience those benefits in our lives, in our personal lives, and in the business world or organizational world. Who wants to change? The hands go down, right? Everyone knows it's difficult. Getting out of our comfort zone, changing our habits, thinking about ourselves differently, letting go of the old way. That's the hard part. And that's the same in our lives with just about everything, right? As well as in organizations. And who wants to lead the change? Well, that's when everyone disappears. And so what's this telling us? It's telling us, as I said, the outcome's great. The process is hard. Leadership is kind of sparse at times. And I don't like to blame executive leaders or blame anyone in particular, but their role is quite difficult too when they've got so many things on their plate. They don't realize the benefit of getting out there, leading the change. And they're in, 60 hours of meetings a week or whatever it is as well. But there's also capability issues with leadership as well. And not realizing how important that role is to get out there and advocate and be in touch, have their finger on the pulse with the organization as well. So we need to think about this stuff anytime we're implementing a change in an organization, not just the benefits and how great it is, and then showing that off and telling all our stakeholders this is going to be fantastic. Yeah, you've got to do that, but you've also got to think it through and think about, can we do this? If so, how would we do it? Will we have a structured process for doing it? How do you make that process as I wouldn't say easy, but minimize the risks and minimize the challenges and manage the impacts? So how well are organizations doing when it comes to change? You may have seen this statistic that 70% of change initiatives fail to achieve their intended benefits. It gets debated a lot. There's a study from Harvard, there's another one from McKinsey, and they both landed on that. I've seen others that say it's closer to 80%. A lot of people refute it and say, no, our organization, nails most of them. And there's lots of different anecdotal evidence about that. I'm yet to see a study which is structured as well as the ones I've seen that disproves this. Whatever the number is, a lot fail. And it's pretty hard. And I think that's what it shows. Failed change efforts. Of those efforts that fail, those change efforts, 80% of the time it's attributed to poor sponsorship from leaders. That was a Deloitte study a few years ago. So it's showing that if leaders aren't getting behind it, and sponsorship isn't just turning up to a steering committee, making decisions and applying budget. A lot of executives tend to think that, and we tend to encourage them. It's actually sponsorship as an act of going out and sponsoring and backing it to your people and getting behind it at all levels, not just the exec level, but senior leaders, managers, and things like that. So that shows you the impact that has on success and failure. It's not saying, it's bad training or it was a bad email communication, right, for leadership. 75% of companies struggle with overwhelmed employees. I'm conscious of who I'm talking to here, and this is an old stat from an old report, and I can't even remember exactly when it was. You've probably got better stats and things on that, but I'm sure you know that many organizations are experiencing that kind of overwhelming their employees. And projects with excellent change management effectiveness were more likely to achieve their project objectives. So change management is a vital kind of element to success. So where organizations go wrong. So I'll talk about some of the common pitfalls in 3 different categories. The first category is capacity. So there's no visibility of the workforce's capacity or change volume. So usually we're going out and making a decision at an exec level. We're doing our strategy and planning. We do our annual planning of where we're going to invest, how much money we're going to spend on changing the organization, what are the projects, and each functional leader comes back and say, we're going to want to put the CRM system in, we want to put this other system, and we want to reorg our business unit and do all these different things. And we added up all the benefits and it looks really great. And we say, go do it. But we don't think about it at an enterprise level and going, well, is this more than we've done in the past? Can our organization actually do this within a 12-month period? And it's hard to work that out initially in a quick conversation. It takes time. But we aren't actually looking for visibility of our workforce's capacity. How many hours can they spend on change each month? That's often a question I ask executives, and they wouldn't have a clue most of the time. And I say, well, we've got to work towards trying to work that out. And we have to work out how much change you've got planned and how many hours is that, and does it fit in the cup, right? It's not factored into initiative sequencing. So often as a CEO and exec team, we're saying, okay, go and do all these projects. Often projects will implement across multiple business units. And so we don't always know exactly what's going on when these projects are impacting, how many hours of impact it is on any given workforce or any given person. So we don't know whether they're going to be overloaded or not. And sometimes you'll have maybe 3-4 major projects impacting the one role or one workforce in any given month. And that could be a real problem, not just for the success of the changes, but for that person's mental well-being, the challenge, and they're going to have to do something about that. They're either going to have to say no and ignore something, or they're going to have to ignore a customer, or drop something in their day job to make it work, or they're going to let one of those projects fail. So you need to sequence things in accordance with the capacity of the organisation. And there's increasing volume of change. There's no commensurate decrease in BAU volume, right? We're always talking about how the pace of change is increasing, organisations have got to keep changing, and there's this hype around change. But we're not sort of reducing what they've got to do on a daily basis. And anything, you see sales teams getting harder KPIs and operations teams getting leaner and leaner, and we've got to do more with less. So there tends to be a real tough balance there for employees to get right. That's capacity. Next pitfall is prioritisation. Some of these are a bit related. So low priority initiatives are often not paused or culled. This is particularly important for large scale transformations. If you've got a 3 to 5 year transformation program, maybe you're trying to become more digital by nature and data focused, or that's the way you engage customers, or you need that for decision making, or maybe it's your big reorganization, whatever the case may be. But you have people in different parts of the business with their own sort of pet projects, and maybe there's a finance team want to implement some, financial acumen thing, and there's some other functions trying to reorg some team, or there's a lot of other changes which maybe don't support the transformation outcome. There might be value and benefits in them, but they're not supporting that ultimate high priority transformation objective. So the question's got to be asked, should you be doing that? Is it a priority right now? You might be able to squeeze it in somewhere. Maybe it has a transformation enablement element to it. If it is, it should be part of that transformation and should be monitored and tracked as an enabler. If it's not, then maybe it should be culled, or maybe it should be put off until the main part is done, the main project, that is. Poor discipline in saying no or asking why. I think all of us sometimes suffer this in our own lives. It happens in organisational cultures as well, at an exec level, but at every level in an organisation, I think. So it's partly in governance at an exec level and boards, and I think there probably should be more tough conversations. And I think it was Peter Drucker said, the key to successful strategy is omission. It's deciding what you're not going to do and being tough about that. I'm working with an organisation at the moment, an ASX-listed company, about 2,500 people. We did a diagnostic last year on them, and we worked about their change capability and everything that they're trying to do. And it was kind of unanimous among everyone we spoke to that we're doing too much. The workforce can't keep up, and we're not doing a good job of how we implement. And they planned this year, and they haven't done anything about it. They're actually doing more. And we've helped them to have some processes and tools and different ways of doing things, but there's simply too much volume for certain roles to manage. And we worked through and helped them categorize their initiatives from an A, B, and C, A being the priority ones, B's the next sort of functional priorities, and then C's are sort of the rats and mice. I'm saying, great, okay, cull all the C's. Like, what? We can't cull them. And it's a tough conversation. I'm actually still working on them to try and get them to say no to certain things and envisage that, well, isn't it better at the end of this 12 months to look back and say, wow, those top 12 initiatives, we absolutely nailed them. The workforce got on board with them. We did a great job with them. We didn't overwhelm them. We actually had the capacity and the budget to manage those really, really effectively because we said no to everything else. Or do you want in 12 months' time to look back and go, oh, we did the same thing again. We implemented 50 different projects and, we overwhelmed the organisation. People got frustrated. They were crashing into each other. It was a relentless onslaught of change. And actually, a lot of them didn't get the adoption we wanted, some of the key strategic priorities. So which conversation do you want to be having in 12 months? I said that exact thing to this client recently. Kind of got their attention. Progressing easy projects while delaying the important. Sometimes the big ones, you haven't done anything that complex and you'll kick the can down the road and you'll keep doing these other small things, which are kind of distracting people and taking up time. Sometimes just stopping those, focusing on getting the big ones right is really important. So as I kind of alluded to, good strategy implementation is you have your priority strategic initiatives, that's your transformation and change. You have your customer sales, service, support functions, doing a good job, that's your BAU, and then everything else is a distraction. And often organizations don't simplify things enough like that. They're sort of doing all these sort of little distractions and these projects which carry over year by year, right? And then they reset the strategy and then they add more onto it, more big strategic programs. And we've got to stop and say, hang on, let's pause. What are the things we need to stop, say no to, simplify things and make it easier for us to not only achieve them, but to actually not break our people. And the third pitfall category is change capability. And we do a lot of this work building organizations' capability to execute change effectively. So with growth comes complexity and the need for sophisticated change management. We actually help some organizations which have gone from maybe 200-300 people to up over 1,000. And I coined this term BFGs, big fast growers. I'm a bit of a Roald Dahl fan, the BFG. And those organizations quickly realize they're implementing these projects and it's sort of reasonably straightforward. It's a little bit hard, but then you get really big as an organization. There's huge complexity. There's politics, there's competing priorities, there's projects which overlap over multiple functional areas. There's lots of things if you're a leader in an organization, you don't even know what's going on in that other business unit half the time. It's that big and complex. And maybe you've got multiple regions and it gets a bit complicated. So you need that sophisticated change management where you can have oversight of everything going on in a structured way. And you need good projects with good change management methodologies and things like that so that you can have consistent results. So it's not going well on this project and it's done differently over here, and differently over here, and you're getting mixed results. So you need to have better structure. A lack of change management expertise. So some small organizations, you don't even have change managers. You won't have anyone with that title in an organization. In bigger organizations, you might have an army of change managers. In the banks, often they'll have up to 200 people with that title. Many different projects, maybe over $1 billion invested in change. So every organization is a little bit different. As you get bigger, more complex, you need specialist change management expertise, whether it's your hire firms who are change managers, bring in a contractor for temporary support or get an expert consultant in like us or whatever you want to do. There's different ways to do it. But you need that expertise one way or another as it gets more complex and large scale. And lacking that enterprise level change portfolio management governance. I know that's a mouthful of change management jargon, but basically what that means is that thing I was sort of touching on as an executive group where you can see all the changes that are happening at a helicopter view and you can sequence them in a structured way and you know what's priority, what's not priority, and you can make decisions to make it digestible for the workforce. You're not just going open slather, go and implement whatever changes you want to your people and your project managers and things like that. So having that enterprise level portfolio management and governance is key. Not sure why the slide numbers are in the middle of the slide there. Don't know what happened there, sorry. No tailored change methodology. Again, I sort of touched on that. So having a change methodology which suits your organization is really useful because it means you get predictability. And in change management, particularly large organizations which hire lots of contracted project resources, something like 80% of the project management and change management community out there are contractors because the work kind of comes and goes and often they're specialists in CRM implementations. And so when that's done in an organization, they're not really needed there anymore. They'll go to the next CRM implementation in another business. So having a change methodology means people can come and go, but they follow that method and it's overseen and it's in a structured way. It limits the risk of that sort of human failure. They're just following the process. They know who they've got to engage. They know how the change works in that organization. So it increases your likelihood of success. An outdated change delivery model. So I'll talk a little bit about an example there of what that looks like. You can have sort of centralized change functions or project functions, which are almost like an internal consulting function. Or you could have it decentralized where you've got these people on lots of different projects and it's really dispersed. And you've got to work out, well, what do we need at this point in time in our organization? Poor understanding of change impacts. So often organizations, particularly with software, And well, they'll be really focused on the solution, like this CRM, or I keep saying CRM, but any sort of system, an ERP system, whatever. It's going to solve all these problems for us, and it's going to reduce time we spend on this. And I always say the system isn't going to do that at all. It's the person using the system that's going to do it. So we actually have to think about, well, how is that person impacted? Does it change the way that they interact with customers? Do they need to have a different data mindset? Do they need to do something different with that system? Does it mean that the operating model of the organisation needs to shift a little bit better? People need to collaborate in different ways. So the system actually has massive impacts and flow and ripple impacts across the organisation. So you'll often find the change isn't that you're changing the system. The change is everything that all the things which the system is creating a requirement for you to change. So defining that change and understanding those impacts and getting people in the room from those user groups is really key. And same goes for an organizational structure or, a culture change program. For example, culture change, you want to not just have the new values, but you want to think about, well, what does this look like in practice? What are the behaviors we want to see more of and less of? What's the future state in detail? What's the current state in this team, that team? And you sort of analyze it in detail so you really understand the change and how it's impacting people. And therefore, you can go and manage those impacts. But if you don't have that detailed understanding the impacts, then you're sort of flying blind, and people might turn up to training, say, in a piece of software, and all these questions are raised. And they're saying, well, to do this, you click here, then you enter this data, and you do this. And then someone will ask, well, actually, what does that mean for this team over here and how they use that system? And the trainer will go, I don't really know. I'm just here to tell you how to use the system, right? So having to understand the impacts means you can actually make sure the training or engagement or how you talk to people throughout the change process covers those kinds of impacts. And it also builds support with people as well, because they'll raise sort of concerns, and sometimes we're running an impact analysis workshop and someone will raise their hand and ask a question and we'll be like, we did not think of that. We had no idea. Thank you. And that's great. And we'll factor that into the plan, and we'll need to make sure we manage that. Or there might be great resistance from some team due to some legacy issue or something like that. So understanding those change impacts and bringing people together early means you can address it. And that's a common one. A rush to deliver before people readiness. An organisation I'm working with now mapped out all these dates, and they're going to do 10 different implementations throughout the year, but they haven't thought about, well, how long does it take to get people ready for that change and that change? And, what sort of resistance can we expect? When there's expected resistance, then you've got to spend more time with those people and the managers in that business unit to address it, to get their support and things like that before you implement. Otherwise, you implement and people are just sort of going to turn their back to it, or they're not going to know what to do with the change kind of thing. No investment in building change capability is a common one. And more, there's too many to fit on this slide, as you can see. But there's often a lot of capability issues in organisations. It can relate to culture and people as well. So, avoiding the pitfalls. This is a framework we came up with. So I call these change capabilities assets. The reason I like that word is because an asset is something you invest in and you get a return. And I need to help people in these organisations see that actually investing in change management is going to get you a return on investment. Sometimes it's seen as this sort of abstract, people seeing it's a bit fluffy or something, and they don't get the return on investment. But if you invest in being good at change, it means all your projects are going to benefit. They're more likely to achieve their ROI, their intended benefit, because you're more likely to get adoption from people and support and all that sort of thing. So I think of them as assets. First category is change leadership and culture. This is things like executive sponsorship, as I talked about, change leadership capability as well. Strategic clarity is a sense throughout your organisation of how much they understand the strategy and where the organisation is going. Often they don't. Often they're sort of maybe stuck in the past, or they don't understand the drivers of change in the strategy. And often it's because the executive team hasn't done a great job of communicating it, and middle managers haven't done a great job of interpreting it for their people. So strategic clarity is important. The reason that's important is if you don't have that, then people will be sort of shocked and surprised by the changes, and they'll be always asking, why are we doing this? Whereas if they have a strong degree of, why they need to have a digital transformation, why this turnaround situation is happening, because the leaders have been going out talking about the market threats and talking about changes in stakeholders, or talking about how the government's shifted and that's impacting your organisation. They're talking about that regularly. People sort of have a strong degree of, I know what's going on out there. I know what's happening in those exec conversations. I know the forces impacting change. So when a change happens, I'm more likely to get it pretty quickly. So that's a bit of a unique one. Change capable culture, as I talked about. Organisations that have been through lots of change tend to have that sort of stronger muscle. And there can be lots of other reasons why an organisation struggles with that culture as well. Change processes and systems, these are the more technical ones. So, and again, I've touched on some of these. Single view of change, so knowing all those different projects, when they're happening, what's the degree of impact as well, how much time is it going to take? So that's that knowing the volume and being able to plan it. And that supports your enterprise portfolio change governance. Change measurement as well, tracking readiness for change, tracking adoption of change and things like that. Not just tracking that we ticked the box, we implemented that system, or we announced that reorg or whatever it is. But it's actually, did it succeed? Is it starting to deliver the benefits? Change enabling talent management framework, in a bit of a mouthful, but talent management processes in people and culture can sometimes support change or not support it. So you might have, transformation may mean you need to be hiring more digitally focused people, or it might mean you need to change the performance framework to sort of make sure people are rewarding and recognizing certain behaviors that's going to enable the culture of the transformation, what that requires. So kind of engagement with people and culture is really key to get those sort of shifts happening. And the third category is change delivery excellence. So this is like a specialist change delivery function, and having expert change managers or that expertise somewhere in your business, having a good change delivery operating model. And I'll show you examples of what that means, whether it's a dispersed or decentralized or a centralized internal consulting function, and the methodologies I touched on, and effective formal communication channels. Often I talk to an organization and they'll say, yeah, we've got these structured channels, and I'll always ask, how many people read them? Or they'll say 10% of people opened the last one. Well, that's not really effective formal channels. And maybe they're not doing live town halls and Q&A sessions. It's not a dialogue, it's kind of top down, and that doesn't really engage people and get the message understood. So there's some of the things in this framework. I'm conscious of time. I'll just shoot through here. So change maturity assessments, where we start to build that. We do that. We come up with change uplift roadmaps for organizations. You can do this a little bit yourself, but we sort of specialize and have a methodology, and then design and integrate those assets into the organization. So you can see here, I've talked about some of these things, so I won't dwell on it just as I won't go over time. But having this single view of change is things like we show clients, we get this data from different projects, we pull it together in a report, we report it to the CEO and say, this is the monthly volume hours for each of these key impacted roles. So we can say, well, this particular role's got 35 hours of change impacting them in May. Are you happy with that? Can they handle that? Do we need to move one of these projects out in June, July? And we're having that kind of conversation. So this supports that kind of sequencing of initiatives and these tough conversations at an exec level. And you're getting people around the table. Change intelligent leadership is something we talk about, CQ, so there's IQ, EQ, now we talk about CQ. And we have various development programs that help with this. We use this Everest analogy. So getting to the summit is like implementing a change, but coming back down safely is actually embedding it and seeing those benefits. And we always talk about how on Everest, a lot of people die coming down the mountain because their resources are depleted and things like that. It's the same in organizations. You implement these changes and people sort of just want to go on to the next change before embedding and making sure that those benefits are there. This is a bit of a structure, again, really detailed, but I'll let you read this in the slides later. But you can have dispersed project change managers, so people on different projects, not knowing what each other are doing and just doing their own thing. You can have a community of practice where you might bring people together to talk about what each project is doing. You can have a portfolio change function or a change management office, which is sort of building some of the tools and making sure everyone's using them effectively, but without too much authority. And then an enterprise change practices where you have sort of a single internal consulting function and you're putting change managers on it. And that tends to have a bit more authority and works with the exec team on that enterprise governance and things like that. Just really quickly, this is a bit how change has changed over the years. So going from that, what we call the size 11 approach, if my people aren't going to do it, I'll kick them in the butt. Top-down driven change, post-war, this is big. A lot of ex-defense force people going into business and using the same sort of military-style tactics. Sometimes that still exists today, for sure. I'm sure you've seen it. Managing the change. Look, technology, when they're putting computers on everyone's desk in the 70s and 80s, they started realizing they were just gathering dust and people are still using paper and like, better go, tell people about how to use this stuff. So they had the concept of change management came about, and they were working side by side with IT and project managers. And that's where change managers sort of started getting talked about. Now it's more collaborative change, part of business as usual. So engaging with people in a regular way about change, having a structured process. So almost like change is like a monthly rhythm. And a lot of organizations are doing that now. So not just sort of planning the projects in an ad hoc way, as I've talked about. I've made that point about 5 times already, but actually having this collaborative approach where everyone's, people are involved, engaged in it. So they know what to expect and they're kind of on the bus and they know the next change is coming and they've sort of heard about it and there's effective communication happening. There's a good change methodology, which makes it a rhythm. And that's what the future is all about there. So change is everyone's job. Executive sponsors, project teams, business leaders. Too often what happens is you get the exec sponsors, which we call change architects. The exec team usually stands up a project team, change enablers, which are also supported by HR and L&D. And then they work on the change, they build a solution, they maybe get an IT provider in, and they sort of throw it over the fence to the change makers, which are in the business. They're the ones who are the beneficiaries of the change, but also have to do the heavy lifting and actually changing what they do. In a successful process, they're working from collaboratively from the very start. So the change makers are involved, they're giving feedback, the solution may be designed to better suit their needs, and it's a collaborative approach, all these different parts of the organization. Do I need to wrap up? Probably going a little bit over time. Look, I'll just briefly touch on these. So there's a couple of things in there, and you probably know this stuff, I think, as people and culture leaders, but possibly. So this is a change curve. So people go through different emotions and thoughts and feelings when they're going through change. And, it may not be these exact emotions, but the job to be done is to actually hear people out and listen to them and address those concerns. And often organizations aren't really aware of the emotions of people, right? But when you go out and talk to someone, let them have a chat about it and pass that feedback up, or people feel heard, the emotional impact actually decreases. And it gives you a chance to reframe it to people as well, and they can sort of move on through it. So just like managing grief, and this is actually adapted from the grief curve in psychology, just like in that, people need to deal with the emotional side of it as well. Is there frustration? Do they feel powerless? And often we do when a change is being done to us, right? We didn't decide to make these changes happen. They're happening to us. We want to feel like we have a say and go through this. And this is just a neuroscience framework from the Neuro Leadership Institute. Commonly, we feel an emotion and we act upon it, and that's that sort of impulsive side of us. An alternative process, though, and we can facilitate this with people, is to allow them to label an emotion. The research shows when you label an emotion, it immediately reduces it. And they've done this by studying the sort of activity in the brain through a brain scan. And as a leader, you can sort of discuss that with people, allowing people to discuss it will ensure that's minimized. And it gives you a chance to reappraise and think, well, how should I be thinking, feeling? What's the most constructive way to act here? And to frame the situation in a different way. And you can do this with your friends and co-workers at any time. It doesn't even have to be change related. I like to use this in change, though, because it is often emotionally charged. And so once you've done that, you've reframed the situation and enables people to act in a really constructive way and move forward, not get stuck in the emotional and not act in a way which isn't going to help them move forward. So there's a couple of tools I'm going to leave you with. This is one for creating a change narrative. 3 I's: inspire, inform, instruct. Organizations are usually pretty good at informing, almost too much bombardment of information, and people see so much information they can't keep up, and then they stop reading the emails. It's just too much, and I've got to get home to my kids and can't read that extra note from the CEO. I find the CEO emails are the ones that people read the least, right? So sometimes you send it from the functional leaders. But inspires the big why. Why should I care about this? What's in it for me? What's the future going to be like? Is it going to be great? Paint a picture in a sort of imaginary way, which is going to inspire people to care. Information is sort of self-explanatory, but the instructive one is a bit more direct. It's telling people, well, here's your role in making this a success. This is what we need you to do to make this a success. people need to know that. Sometimes they sort of hear the inspire and the inform, and they go, okay, that all sounds great, but I don't really know what I'm meant to be doing. And so leaders need to have that. And it's hard for a CEO to craft that for everyone in the organization. That's why every manager needs to be sort of thinking about, well, how do I interpret this for my people? What do my people need to do? Okay, they need to go to training on this day, and they need to think about this differently, and they're going to need to adopt this, and it's going to be hard, and I need to support them through it. So being a bit more directive is useful. This is just a tool for having an action plan for building your team support through change. So you can just list out your team members, think about where they're at in a particular given change that's happening. It's your Salesforce system, admin or whatever it is, and say, okay, let's look at the team members. Where are they? Are they resistant? Are they passive? Are they supporting? Are they an advocate? And think about what's the source of that barrier, or is there an enabler there that I can tap into? Is it they don't feel confident with technology? Is it a capability thing? Is it they don't feel engaged or bought into it because we haven't talked to them enough about it? What is that barrier? And then what can I do to shift the dial? What's an action I can have? So it's really thinking that human-centered approach. Where are they at? What do I need to do to bring them along the change curve? A little tool you can use, and that's in some of our programs. So a couple of questions you can ask on any change program that's happening. And you should ask, and your people should have a right to ask as well. Why are we doing this? How are we impacted by this? When is it happening? What does success look like for me and for our business? What are the metrics of success? What are the risks? How can we avoid them? How much time should I allocate to managing the transition? Guarantee on most change projects, when you first hear about it, it's going to be hard to answer those, but you should strive to find the answers for them. And once people start getting answers to these questions, then they're sort of moving along the change curve, and they're more likely to start accepting it because they're going to really understand it. Too often we don't go to this level. We just think, oh, it's a new system happening on next day, and that's it. But there's a lot more to it that is required for us to adopt. That's basically it. There's a couple of case studies in there as well, which you might be interested in. We sort of bring some of this to life, but that's it for today. Is there any questions? Sorry, I know I went a little bit over time, I think there. Sorry.
Any burning questions? Happy to take that.
Yeah.
Question about cultural change, progress, and
Yep.
success you've had with that.
Yep. Just generally, they're quite hard. I think maybe not stating the obvious, but I've worked on 2 in the last 12 months, and I think where it seeds is if you have the entire executive team on board and wanting it to happen. That's probably the most important thing. In one example, we redesigned a set of values for them. They actually didn't even have values. Or they were, but I sort of plucked away and about 10 years old, no one ever talked about them. But then we had a lot of sessions with every single employee. It's about 300 employees.
Yep.
Talk about it, have their voices heard, to define what the behaviours look like in an inspiring way. And when we launched it back to them, they were like, yes, this is exactly what I want. So it was really well received because of the way we kind of consulted with it.
Yep.
So the whole design of it involved every single person in the organisation. I think that drives success. And then there are a bunch of formal programs which made sure they don't forget it. Which included, there's a reward and recognition program for rewarding of demonstrations of values. There's an innovation kind of Shark Tank type forum because innovation was one of their big values. There's the training, there's a whole new performance management framework, which I helped with as well, which is based around those 5 values and having objectives for each one. So there's different formal initiatives, and then there's a kind of leadership of it as well, and engaging people. Don't know if that answers it, but that's probably it's just a recent example where I think it's gone well. Yeah. Any other
Fantastic.
questions?
We're running a little over time, so we might direct any questions to you by email.
Yeah, happy to talk offline. If you want to reach out on LinkedIn, happy to answer any questions anytime. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
You can tell why I was really tempted to, you know me, I always reframe things. I was really tempted to do something for Huw, but I didn't want to steal his thunder. You can see why I was so excited to hear from him. We all work in change, right? And so for me, even personally, some great tips here in knowing that like change isn't just about implementing policy, implementing new initiatives, but it's about people at the very heart of it. So amazing thoughts just there. I'm going to zoom forward to, there is more material on the slides. Through email, we'll be sending out slides with permission, of course. So you'll get access to those case studies.